Okay, I was in a cult, but definitely faced racism in school. The way I was being treated by certain teachers were because of how people perceived me as a black woman. I grew up with my mum always saying to us, you should always have a telephone voice. We're speaking like this, but when you pick up the phone, make sure you're enunciating, you're speaking clearly. And I would code switch and have like the white people laugh. And it's essentially to make them feel more comfortable so that they're not as intimidated by your differences. I realized that code switching is also racial.
We're building the world's largest archive of LGBTQ+, global majority, and migrant stories. Every voice you hear helps preserve our shared history and inspire the next generation. If our mission speaks to you, show your support, subscribe to our channel, and share your story in the comments below. One voice, one story at a time. This is Oral Histories.
My cultural background is Black Caribbean / Black British, and my identity in terms of which letter I am in the community is queer. I feel like queer best describes my gender identity as well as my sexuality. It feels more like a description versus a label. So for me, that was the label or the word that kind of felt the most home for me, and also the word that best described what I was seeing around me and resonating with, which was queerness.
And what's your earliest memory of being a queer person of color?
Probably being in primary school and just having crushes on girls and not realizing that it was not strange. So for me, I'm attracted to men, women, non-binary people. When I was in primary school, I didn't have that many like queer icons on the TV, but I definitely felt a difference in it being something I was allowed to be as somebody that was Black. And I've always perceived myself as Black. My parents didn't leave it to chance. It's always been a discussion in my home. Like my dad in particular always told us about what it's like being a Black person in a white country, and also in the music that we grew up listening to, which is reggae. A lot of reggae is revolutionary. It's about fighting Babylon and the concept of being in a European country, the concept of white supremacy without knowing that was the name of it. So I was very aware of my Blackness, and the being aware of my queerness came much later on in life, but I always felt like queerness was not Black. So primary school was definitely when I started feeling some feelings and didn't know how or what to do with them. I don't feel like I need to show up in a certain way, or I don't feel like I'm not queer enough. Which is something I was like insecure / unsure about when I first realized I was queer like a few years ago. I kind of felt like, well, I like men so much and I've only dated men. So do I need to now start dating like every woman I see? Like I was like frantically looking around for the women like, oh my gosh, do I need to start dating them? But it's like I was already picky with the men I dated. So I don't now need to just have no standards or like try and find somebody that I click with. I'll click with the person regardless of their gender identity, in replacement of it being that I now need to tick off a quota and do like diversity and inclusion with my queerness. Sometimes I have this thought that crosses my mind when my family is saying ignorant things about queer people. I'm like, I feel like I should come out to them so that they can understand that actually it could be me. It could be anyone close to you. You are saying all of these things as if it's somebody that you don't know, but actually it could be somebody you do know. As we were talking, we were like, I don't think that's a logical thing to think if you were straight, because it's a bit odd. And I was like, yeah, it is. And the reason that I didn't do it is because I thought I don't want to make it seem like a joke or like a phase when it's not a phase for me. But I think it was me realizing that I'm not straight and that queerness suits me so much and makes a lot of sense to me. And then thinking, okay, so how can I do the work to make my family less ignorant and more open without jeopardizing potentially losing them?
And have there been any cultural or religious influences that have shaped your identity or specifically your queer journey maybe?
Religious / cultural background. I grew up in a home where we used the Bible as like our reference and our compass, but my parents weren't strict about us identifying as Christians. And then when I was about 15, 16, I was in a cult, but it was still helpful. So it was a Christian cult, but it was also just me finding religion in a way that was like accessible and aiming at young people and relating to young people. It was only after years that I realized, okay, this group is not just a church, it's actually it's a high control Christian cult. However, I feel like being in that space, I was just around more people that were really strong about what they believed in, and that made me feel like, I guess, conviction. It also, in a roundabout way, took me to where I'm at now, which is not a Christian, and I'm just a spiritual girl that is aiming to learn as much as I can about African spirituality and the practices that resonate with me. I guess the strange thing is being in that cult environment whilst also navigating being queer and not knowing it, and just noticing how, and also it was an African church and I'm Caribbean, noticing like the cultural differences between like how we express ourselves, the things that are cultural practices that don't necessarily translate. So for example, Carnival was also like a big point of contention. I'm from Liverpool Grove and our church was based in North Kensington. And, you know, they would always make shady comments about how it's unchristian to go to Carnival, which is implying that the way that we express ourselves and the dancing that we display is not Christian, which for me felt very colonial. And I had a concept of like my expression not being ideal for the white man based on the conversations that I'd had with my dad from young. So I remember not knowing how to reconcile with this mentality of Christianity looking like this in that picture and self-expression looking like that. And considering that I already displayed lots of queerness and just being bold in my expression, being an individual, I definitely felt like my identity was shrinking whilst in that space. But it was good because in hindsight, it made me look at who I was becoming. And because I didn't like it, I doubled down on who I was. And it took me to who I am now. So essentially, it wasn't people in particular. It was the environments that created this catalyst for me to find my most authentic version of what my culture and practices mean to me. And also, I spend a lot of time researching the practices that exist across the Caribbean and Africa that are traditional and that have maybe been demonized. So in Jamaica, we have obia, which is witchcraft, and it's demonized as something that is quote unquote demonic because Jamaica is a very Christian country. But the way that we even perceive Christianity in the Caribbean is not how Christianity is perceived in the UK, in terms of the way that Black people express themselves across different realms is also very similar. The shaking of the body, the speaking of tongues, the pouring of libations, there are things that cross over in our ancient traditions that also cross over with Christianity. So for me, I just found it, and I'm still finding it interesting, engaging with different content creators that are into ancient spirituality and practices and that come from similar backgrounds as me, whether that's Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, or whether that's West Africa, whether that's Jamaica. So yeah, that's kind of taken me to who I am now, and also to not be ashamed of it, which is something that I felt a lot of whilst I was in the Christian space. A lot of shame and a lot of conflict with identities and clashing of, if I'm this, how can I believe in that type of thing? So yeah, that's, I guess, where I'm at now.
What is it about the ancient spirituality practices that make you feel more connected to the previous practices that you had engaged in?
I think the best thing about detaching from Western Christianity is that there are things I inherently do that I feel like would be something I would be ashamed of if it was in the church. And so, for example, I'm attracted to the occult. I'm attracted to the hidden. I'm attracted to secrets, to things that haven't been uncovered yet. So even within the realm, and this isn't me speaking on Christianity for anyone else, it's my experiences of Christianity. A lot of the time, discussions about things I didn't understand were discouraged. And then when I did have discussions, if there was no definitive answer, which happens when you're discussing faith and spirituality, then I would almost be seen as like a too much of an independent spirit. But again, that's terminology used by the specific cult that I was in. But it's also something that is a remnant of colonialism and slavery. So for me, African spirituality and practices that are native to how we did things before, whether that's, for example, having an altar or just speaking to our ancestors and acknowledging that our ancestors have an impact on who we are today. For me, I feel very connected to like the source. I feel less ashamed of being a human being that makes mistakes and does things that aren't necessarily right. And I feel empowered by being me. And I feel that there's more ownership of what I'm doing in a sense of I'm doing things from a perspective of balance. There is always good and there's always evil. There are always right and wrong, but I'm not doing things because I'm scared of going to hell. I'm not doing things because of the fear of being reprimanded. I'm doing things because these are the things that make me feel good and resonate with my values. So it feels more intentional now that I've moved away from organized religion. And there's still so much knowledge and like guidance that I received and can still receive from religion. I just know that I wasn't made to be subordinate. And the reality of religion is that you are subordinate. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but it's just not what works for me now. So with my spiritual practices now, I feel very empowered. I feel very intelligent as well. I feel like the amount of things that I learn and the amount of things that I put into place, I see evidence of the work I'm doing on myself and the practices that I'm doing in my everyday life. Whereas I feel like in Christianity, I almost was not allowed to look at me because that would be seen as ego. And, I'm always having to attribute my accomplishments or my blessings to the result of me praying, for example, or the result of me being a good girl. Whereas actually, good and bad things are going to happen regardless. But if you have an understanding of the balances and the forces of the universe and how your relationship with your source and your ancestors are, then I don't know, I feel like it empowers you more to make better decisions from a different place. Yeah.
We're going to talk a bit about migration and belonging as well. Where were your parents from originally?
So my parents were both born in the UK. My mum was born and raised in Northwest London. And then my dad was born here, but he was raised in Jamaica from he was like 4. And then he came back to the UK as like a young adult. So like in his early 20s. But he's Jamaican in terms of like his identity, how he perceives himself. My mum is first generation British Caribbean. So yeah.
Growing up, did you face any challenges settling in the area that you grew up in?
Yes and no. So I grew up around Labatt Grove, which is multicultural, but the school that I went to, the primary school I went to, I was still a minority and I still felt very misunderstood. Definitely faced racism in school, but didn't know that that's what it was because, people tell you that if you're not being slapped in the face or called the N-word, then it's not racism. But looking back and even at the time, I was able to perceive that the way I was being treated by certain teachers or the way that I was being perceived, whether it's too talkative or a bit troublesome at some points, were because of how people perceived me as a Black woman. I feel like in secondary school, I was around a lot of other Black Caribbean people and also in terms of like the demographics, the teachers as well. So I had like a lot of representation. I feel like we had things like African Caribbean Celebration Night, and that was like a very specific night that I think is something that really benefited me growing up because I was able to see other people and have different examples of people from my culture. But I did also feel disconnection sometimes with my Jamaican side because my parents were split up. So I was primarily raised by my mum and I was always around my Bajan family. So Bajan is the collected noun for people from Barbados, also Barbadian. But with my Jamaican side, I felt quite distant because of the fact that that was the family from the estranged side, just that made sense. And also I feel like because people had a very stereotypical view of what Jamaican means to them, and then they didn't understand that I'm not necessarily what they would perceive as Yardi. And Yardi is, now Yardi has a different meaning, but back in the day, Yardi was a term that people used to basically say ghetto. Because I was always raised with like respectability politics and my mom saying, you know, we need to speak like this so that they know we're educated, and we need to present in this way so that they know you have an education. These are things we're taught for survival. But I felt like, you know, at home should be your safe space to be your most expressive. Whereas at home, my mom was always like policing how me and my brothers will speak to each other even. So it gave me not an identity crisis, but just like a different perception of like what it means to be Black Caribbean. And I think it slightly instilled some embarrassment, because the perception of saying that we shouldn't speak in this way or shouldn't present in the way we naturally do is that it's not good enough, and that it's not going to be how you get on in life, which means I need to switch. And yeah, growing up, I did feel like I would have to code switch a lot. I also felt like because there was like a difference in migration and culture between my Black African friends and my Black Caribbean friends, then the perception was that we have it easier because we've been there for longer. Whereas when you're from the population that's like the original Black community, you're going to experience differences in discrimination based on era, circumstances, etc. It's easy to perceive us as the cool ones whilst not realizing that my home language it shouldn't have really been English, in the sense that Patois is its own language. But because my dad would speak to me, and if I ask him what something means, he would kind of switch off or tell me off for not knowing, then it meant that I was not able to speak Patois as my first language. I could understand it, but I couldn't speak it because there was no validity given to Patois. It was always called a broken language. It was always called a dialect, when if Patois is broken English, Flemish is broken Dutch. Like, you know, and because I later on then studied languages, it kind of made me realize even more how much it is a language, and how much by not speaking it and not engaging with it in the same way, it left me feeling a bit disconnected with my culture. But I reconciled that through music. So that, I think, always kept me connected. Music, food, style, having other friends that are also Jamaican, and also my Bajan family always being there and always having this hybrid British Caribbean-ness about them.
Can you explain what code switching is?
Code switching, for those who don't know, is a linguistic function. So it's used by people that are from a culture that's different to the main culture. For example, working class people may code switch to be more comfortable around middle and upper class people, and to have less, I guess, stereotypes. In my context, I code switch because in my home, I speak a different English. So we speak Caribbean English, and also I'm just from inner city London. So I speak slang, I speak all of these different words that when I'm in maybe a job interview or around people that aren't familiar with how I speak, then I would speak differently. The best example of code switching would be having a telephone voice. So like I grew up with my mum always saying to us, and for context, my mum is British born, so she's first generation Brit with a Bajan background. And she was like, you know, you should always have a telephone voice. We're speaking like this, but when you pick up the phone, make sure you're enunciating, you're speaking clearly, and avoid using like slang words that you would use. So that kind of stuck with me throughout life. And when I was at uni, I realized that code switching is also like racial, because I would code switch and have like a laugh that I do around white people. So it's like the corporate laugh. Some people would have like a corporate laugh or like the white people laugh. And it's essentially to make them feel more comfortable so that they're not as intimidated by your differences. It's also really fun when you're doing it like for bants, because I just feel like life is short and it's nice to speak one way with like your family and then speak another way with your friends. Also, I realized that when I'm around other Londoners, especially if I'm around like other Black Londoners, the way I speak, it just changes automatically because I know they'll understand me. Whereas if I was speaking to, even if I was speaking to like a Black American, I would change what I'm saying so that they can understand me. So that's a form of code switching as well. Like if I'm talking to them and I say pavement and they're like, what's that? I would say sidewalk because I understand that they don't know what pavement is, or sneaker for trainer. But yeah, it's a function that is common. But the reason a lot of people speak about it more now and in popular culture is because people are now realizing that it's racist to have to code switch to be respected. And when you look at people like Adele, the singer Adele, she doesn't code switch, and people love her because they say she's relatable and she seems like a working class gal. But it's because the stereotypes for working class white people are not the same as working class ethnic minorities or global majorities. So yeah, that's what code switching is.
In terms of discrimination, have you faced discrimination or exclusion as a queer person of colour?
Yes, specifically as a queer Black woman, because there are so many things that intersect when you're queer and then you're also from a non-white community. Facing anti-Blackness from other queer people in the scene is like so boring because number one, like, let's try something new. Let's try some unity. And number two, it's just like disappointing because we are both oppressed in two different ways. And then instead of using your experiences to like find kinship, you're using it to weaponize against me. This was actually before I knew I was queer, but I was on set for my friend Abir Mohammed. He was creating a short film and I was one of the protagonists and I was playing a lesbian, which is actually so funny because at the time he asked me, he was like, do you mind playing a lesbian? I was like, do I have to kiss anyone? And he was like, no. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I was more concerned about whether I'd have to be physically intimate than whether it was going to be with a girl or a guy. But I was the gay best friend of a closeted gay Muslim man, and he was gay and in real life, and he was South Asian background, and he basically was asking me about the size of my then partner's penis. And I just thought the fact that you think that this is appropriate, number one, is quite shocking. But number two, it's like you are objectifying me and my ex, and you're seeing us as pieces of meat, and you're not seeing us as human. And that happens quite a lot. Being seen as like a gimmick or being seen as a caricature instead of a person. We're not just like clickbait and funny characters in the movie. You know, we are human and we have complexities and we have so many things that bring us joy, but also things to navigate and things to overcome. And I feel like I face that from other ethnic minorities that are queer. I faced it from other white queer people who feel like because they're queer, it cancels out their ignorance. And I've also faced it in my own community from other Black Caribbean people that just don't respect our identity and see it as wrong and disgusting and deviant.
In terms of queer POC spaces, are there any that you're involved in, and how did that come about?
So at the moment, the way that I engage in activism with my queerness and like being in spaces specifically for queer POC people is usually my DJ gigs. So I'm very intentional about who I play for, the spaces I play for. So I've played with honeysuckle events. They are specifically for queer POC people, but they're inclusive. So they have if you're queer but you're also white, you're also welcome. I tend to play in spaces as well that prioritize versus include, because I think that it's important to be in spaces that are run by and for people. So even some of the nights that I play at, Popola is one of them. And Popola is a night created by Evie Core. They're a DJ and activist from Venezuela. And they have a focus for like Afro-Latino and Afro-Caribbean people. And being in that space makes me feel inspired because it's also immigrant focused, because Evie is from Venezuela, like born and raised, and came here. And so a lot of the other people that play on the lineup are either from immigrant background or from global majority background and based here. I think as well, music is such a constructive way of taking up space. And also it is a protest. It is a privilege to be able to get paid to play music that in itself is disruptive and goes against the status quo and goes against the environment we live in, which is white supremacy. So being in those type of spaces, I'm able to show up and take up space. One of my focuses as well is being in environments that are created for Black, queer, Caribbean people, because that is a gap. That's where there's a gap in the market. Often it feels like a paradox being queer and from Caribbean background, but we've been here since the beginning of time, like all queer people. And being able to be in spaces where you're hearing niche genres of music that previously did not get played, like soca music, which is from the Caribbean, that is extra special. You know, I think you can go in places and hear dancehall in a lot of mainstream parties, but you will usually hear like the most homophobic songs of them all mixed in because people don't care or they don't have a cultural reference. And even though you might hear those same tunes in queer spaces, there's an irony to hearing it then. You know, people are singing the homophobic lyrics in a comical and almost tongue-in-cheek way because these are the same slurs that have been used against us, and now we're singing them happily and we're making people mad that we are happy and joyful. So yeah, I think activism is usually via spaces versus organizations. And yeah, I enjoy being able to give back and being able to show up for my community.
And you've mentioned DJing, you've mentioned clubbing. Maybe talk a bit about dancing, how dancing, you're able to express your identity through that art form or through that medium.
Yeah. So for me, dance is self-expression, and it's also an amazing way for me to honor my culture, because in Caribbean culture, we use our waist a lot. We call it whining. We're very flamboyant. We're very expressive. We're very tongue-in-cheek. And also, it's very provocative, the style of dance, when we're talking about soca and dancehall. Dancehall in itself is a subculture that a lot of people don't realize it's a genre of music as well as a subculture. So because Jamaica is a very conservative country, the subculture, of course, sub means below. Subcultures always go against the grain. So the reason that dancehall is very expressive, very vulgar, very slack, or you call it, is because it's going against the grain. And so a lot of the dancing as well represents that. And I feel like growing up, I was kind of taught to like be prude and like demure. And I just didn't really want to. I had to, but I didn't really want to. So as an adult now, doing what I want and being able to dance and express myself, whether that's whining, whether that's cartwheeling in the club, whether that's twerking, whether that's shaking my ass. Like for me, it's more than just fun. It's spiritual. It genuinely feels like I'm channeling spirits when I'm dancing, because I'm expressing all of the joy and also getting rid of all of the anger that I can't express in my day-to-day life.
What does it mean to you to take up space as a queer creative? So how would you challenge norms and assert your identity?
For me, the way that I take up space as a queer Black woman, especially in the creative scene, is by being very strict about what I stand for. I think that sometimes it can be easy to have that scarcity mindset, especially when it's your living versus like a hobby, where you're like, damn, these people are like low-key homophobic, but I need this money, so I'm going to do it. And it is a privilege to refuse, but I just don't want to encourage being in spaces where I'm not wanted. I'm being in spaces where if I speak up for something that's wrong, whether that's homophobia, transphobia, then I'm the one that's shunned. I want to be in a space where people have a spirit of inclusion and not just tolerance, but love and genuine friendship and support for people that may not be like them and may be like them. So I'm very intentional with the gigs I take. I'm very intentional with the people I spend time with, and I'm very vocal as well. So if I see something's wrong, I speak up about it, especially when it comes to, recently I had to address some misogyny and homophobia that I noticed in the Caribbean music scene, which is very male-centered and very homophobic. You know, a lot of the discourse around conversations, especially around dancehall music, people have the excuse of, no, this is just how we speak. We're just very direct. And that's not the truth. You know, you can be direct and you can be compassionate. You can be direct and not use homophobic language. And you can be direct without targeting an already oppressed people within our community. And I spoke out about it and it ruffled some feathers. And I was glad because I felt like it was a conversation that was only being had behind closed doors. And I feel like I named names and I called people out, but it wasn't that I was picking on people. It was highlighting that every action has a reaction and there are consequences for the things you're doing. And instead of it being from a place of people pretending that they're not saying things or pretending that they don't think the things that they do, whilst also spreading that messaging through the music that they're playing because they're trying to avoid cancel culture, I wanted real dialogue and real conversation around why do you believe what do you believe? What do our parents do that we can do better and differently? And how does that look in the scene? What am I playing? How am I playing it? What environments am I creating? When I'm emceeing, am I being gender neutral? Like, I think about these things because I just think about the fact that in a lot of queer spaces and kink spaces, which I tend to frequent because they cross over and I'm kinky, the focus is on consent and the focus is on being vocal and having enthusiastic consent. And so one of the things I've loved is like not assuming people's pronouns, not assuming that the women of the dance want to bend over and dance. You know, in a lot of these parties that you go to, traditionally, they'll tell the women like, yes, all the girls bend over. And I'm like, why is it us doing the work? Why aren't the men bending over? And sometimes the men do want to bend over, but they're not in a safe space to bend over. So it's things like that, you know, making small tweaks to make big changes and adjusting the things that people, I guess, see as the default. I think changing the default for me is how I take up space, making people double think or rethink how they previously perceived something as their norm, because everything is normal until it's not.
How do you hope your story will contribute to the broader LGBTQ plus narrative?
I feel like sharing my experience is important in people understanding that queerness looks so different based on people's context, whether that's my cultural background, my social background, my career, the spaces I frequent, and also just having the understanding that we all have a journey and we're all on a different journey. This is something that even me, I'll be able to look back at and be like, wow, this is how I perceive myself at 31. I didn't perceive myself like this when I was 25. And experiencing growth and a better understanding of self is like one of my biggest aims in life. So I feel like being able to prompt other people to start thinking about themselves in an expansive way and thinking about themselves in a way of, what does my queerness look like to me? You know, queerness isn't just a vibe. Also, I think sometimes queer people don't necessarily realize that it is political, whether we like it or not. We are politicized by just being queer. So I want people to really, I guess, use their platforms more, whether that's literally just their platform as in you have a workplace and you have friends at your workplace that accept you for who you are, instead of letting them see you as a monolith and you being the representative of queerness, maybe spark some dialogue there, you know, try and spark some thought, not in a way that you need to educate them, but just like be open to them learning something from you and there being a cultural exchange that you can both benefit from versus feeling like you need to, I guess, teach them something by educating. You existing is like a social experiment, and showing up for yourself fully is enough of a prompt for other people to learn from that. So yeah, I think the advice I would give my younger self, especially my teenage, confused, bigoted, I was quite bigoted self at that time, is to just have more compassion and to look inwards, because I was definitely one of those people that would make like strange homophobic comments from a place of like distancing myself from homosexuality, and the concept of me even being even a little bit gay was like a foreign concept to me. But at the same time, it's what I thought based on the context of how I was raised and the discourse I heard. So I would just say to her to be more open, to actually listen to her gut, because my gut was always telling me like, you just want people to live their best lives. You want people to feel happy and loved. And that's when the cold resolve started to defrost. And that's what kind of also prompted my journey. But I didn't have that compassion with myself. I had that compassion with everyone else because I just refused to see it in myself. So yeah, having that compassion and just being open and being patient with myself, I think would have probably got me to this stage earlier. But I believe in divine timing, so I feel like I got here at the right time.